You're listening to Feel Good Astrology with Louisa Tanner Munson. To request a personal reading with Louisa, go to www.feelgoodastrology.com.
Hi, it's Louisa Tanner Munson, and this is part 8 of Chiron Through the Houses. So I've been recording podcasts about the effects of Chiron when you're born with it in the 8th house, or 7th house, or whichever house it happens to be in. And I've also been talking about what happens when Chiron transits through this house too. So this is the house about the 8th house. And I guess the first thing we need to think about is what goes on in the 8th house. What's the 8th house about? Now, the 8th house, astrologically, is ruled by Scorpio. And also, is linked to the planet Pluto. So if you know much about Pluto, you know that's about transformation and life and death and all of those subjects that you tend to brush under the carpet because you don't want to talk about. So the 8th house, some people have sort of labelled it as life, death and taxes. So life, death and taxes, birth, death and taxes. It's about all those things in life that are permanent and bring about a sharp change in your life that you have no real control over. Birth, death, taxes. You also don't really have much control over other people's money, which also shows up in this house. And I guess the way I really think about it is, when you meet someone for the first time and you say, oh, hello, how are you? What's your name? What do you do? And you make conversation. The 8th house rules all those things you don't talk about to somebody new when you first meet them, because it would be deemed really rude to ask such searching questions. So I would also add into that list death, taxes, birth, and sort of sex, sexual likes and dislikes, all those things that just seem a bit risque to talk about. It could be affairs, because sex and death, there's a kind of sort of darkness to the 8th house. And if you think of Scorpio as well, the sign Scorpio, it has a really bad reputation astrologically, which I think is actually really not very fair, because I don't think it's possible to really live a light life without facing the darkness sometimes. And it's through our darkness and through acknowledging the parts of us that we maybe have shame about that we really find the light and can forgive ourselves about. So the 8th house is really quite an important place, I think. So people with a Chiron in the 8th house, i.e. the wounded healer archetype, childhood wounding from the 8th house, have quite a tough time, because the 8th house represents all that is hidden and all that seems a bit grubby and all that seems a bit shameful and all that seems unspoken, secretive. And so people born with Chiron in the 8th house, there's a lot of shame and blame and guilt and anger held in the psyches of these people. And it almost feels like their wound is that they've been born into secrecy, or they've been born into a situation that there's nothing very clear about. Somebody that I know, a client of mine with an 8th house Chiron, was born into a family where he learnt about a secret sister many years later via one parent, and then later on found out that he had a secret brother by the other parent, and his parents didn't really show any kind of real spiritual bond during their lifetime, and so this person was kind of born into a situation of shame, and there was feelings of shame and anger towards birth in the whole family. And the eighth house, given that it represents birth and death and shame and anger and sex and other people's money, often represents divorces and split families and step families and step brothers and sisters and things like that. But it also comes up in the charts of people who have a strong family karma and strong family patterns. So in this person's family, there are a lot of astrological link-ups showing that the family members are almost a couple of generations up and a couple of generations down. This pattern of shame comes up again and again. And because it's kept secret, and because people are all born into this secret sect, there's no being open and honest about it. And when you're open and honest about what's going on, you get shut down. So these patterns stay entrenched in families and go on generations. So don't be surprised if you have an eighth house Chiron, to realise that things around you are unspoken and there's a lot of pain in the secrets. And they might not be your secrets. So chances are they're not your secrets, because the eighth house is very much about other people's values, not yours. Your values come from the second house. Your values and beliefs about yourself are very much the second house, but the eighth house really represents other people's values around you. So it's like your parents' values, your siblings' values, the environmental values that you've been surrounded by are secretive and you're not allowed to talk about them. And there's pain if you do. It also shows up in the charts of people who have been disowned and who have spent time really separate from parents, because living around them and living near them becomes absolutely untenable. And if your eighth house Chiron is also badly aspected or aspected with strong squares or oppositions to outer planets, then the situation just seems a lot more intense than it would be normally. So you might find that there are phases in your life where things really change, because with the outer planet aspects, you're more likely to be triggered onto new life paths and have some severe changes in your life, which makes life a lot more fun and interesting. Chiron pain can also show up as sexual pain in the eighth house. So, for instance, whereas people with a lot of energy around the eighth house might have some very strong sexual fantasies and very strong sexual needs and wanting to have them met, with Chiron, there's almost a feeling of reticence to and fear about being sexual, and probably a lot of judgments about mainstream sexuality and how mainstream sexuality exists and whether it's right or wrong, and judgments about that. So it's not unheard of to find somebody who feels a little bit repressed to express themselves sexually, because they've seen sex in other people around them and not really felt in alignment with the way sex has been introduced to them. So you might experience that. And other people's money as well. There is, with Chiron in the eighth house, there might be this feeling that other people have the money and that you don't. And so there's some sort of pain involved in living around other people who claim to have the power, because money, sex, death, birth, it's all about power, isn't it? Who has it? Who has control? There's a lot of control issues going on in the eighth house. So if you've got Chiron in the eighth house, you may very well have had a very controlling parent or very controlling environment, whereby if you have a lack of money or a lack of intrinsic market value, you are automatically assigned a lot less choice. So, for instance, parents might revere you and celebrate your successes, but absolutely put you down if you are not seen as having the same values that might bring about wealth and stability in the modern Western sense. So there's a lot of really harsh issues, and these are ones that aren't your issues, but they're ones that have been foisted upon you and not spoken about. It's like there are these assumptions about what life is and what a good life is and how it should be. And your pain comes from having to live in those environments and those judgments, but not being allowed to challenge it. So that's a lot of stuff going on. Now, when Chiron goes through the eighth house, actually, before I go there, I need to just talk about people whose charts I've seen sort of transcend this 8th house Chiron. It's a tough one because it can make natives of an 8th house Chiron grow up not feeling very secure about their ability to make cash and their ability to find their own value in life. It also represents people who may very well just not feel good enough for their family matrix and feel scapegoated as well, really scapegoated, especially if they seem loving and connected and they're around lots of people who are disconnected. So it's a very, very tough one. So these people grow up being quite compliant but very distant because they have to shut down and shut off because the people around them can be quite toxic. So people who have really survived this 8th house Chiron tend to be people who have just decided that they're going to make their own way and have found independence from the life, death, sex, salubriousness and things that just seem dirty and dark and destructive. So they are people who have decided to find the light of all the Scorpio issues. And, at the start I said Scorpio has a bad reputation, but in my mind, Scorpio forces all of our darkness to be re-evaluated and brought into the light, so that from my perspective, the people that I've seen with a very strong 8th house theme and a strong 8th house Chiron, the ones that have survived their upbringing and their pain from the darkness around them, they're the ones that have used that darkness, analysed it, thought, is it true? Is this true? Is this something I want in my life? And if it's not, they've said, okay, well, I need to have the courage to force my own life and to find the light in my life. So these are people who are devoted to finding and honouring the light within themselves and being very open and candid about their darkness and being very open and candid about when they failed or tripped up. Lord knows they haven't had the best role models around them because their role models have had their own Chiron issues, making them feel ashamed. So these are people who've decided not to live in shame and to live with a sense of forgiveness and light. So that's where I see the biggest opportunity for healing. Now, when Chiron goes through the 8th house, it could be something very straightforward, though painful, representing the death of somebody very dear to you. Now, I don't want to just look at it from that perspective. But, the obvious parallels are there. You've got Chiron, the wounded healer, and the feelings of separation that come from wounds in the place of inheritance, death, life, sex, death, those cycles of where things change irrevocably. And also, it's also the sign of taxation and other people's money. Let's not forget that. I have seen it come up in the charts around times when inheritances have been due, and sometimes long overdue other people money situations where there's been a lot of pain involved in resolving these things come to fruition during this time. But it can be quite painful, a painful time for working through other people's money. So, for instance, if you've gone through a divorce recently, it might be that there's pain from working through other people's money and working out the separation of assets. So the idea of pain and separation are quite strong here. It doesn't feel like you're being separated from somebody suddenly. That's more likely to occur around a 7th house Chiron transit, where you start to let go of your attachments to other people. But the 8th house Chiron there is pain in separating yourself from the assets of other people, and your attachment to other people, and your attachment to sex, and your attachment to life-changing things. It could also mark the time when you're going into menopause. So, for instance, if you are hitting menopause now, and Chiron's moving into the 8th, it will show the pain involved in re-evaluating your purpose in life. It shows the clear ending of one life and the new start of another. And if you think of the eighth house as representing the darkness that can lead to the light. It could be as simple as recognizing some of the emotional, hormonal draws that have been weighing on you all this life and the resultant freedom from it. I don't know. It's all interpretation. But as you can see, what I'm hinting at here is that there is a life transition. You know, you are transitioning during a Chiron eighth house movement. You are transitioning from one stage of life to another, as simple as that. And, you know, it might be that you are learning to live without somebody, or learning to live in a different way. You are becoming, you're having a different relationship to yourself, who you know yourself to be. This could easily turn up in the chart of somebody who awakens suddenly, you know, like people having spontaneous awakenings where they have woken up into the light. This is all really deep stuff. It can also be about parenting. So I would look at this time not from a fearful perspective, though it's difficult not to, but look at it as an opportunity to clear some of your shame, guilt and anger from your childhood and stuff that you are holding on to that keeps you compromised in some way and keeps you living life in a way that doesn't serve you. And it offers you the opportunity to deal with your light, deal with your lightness, fall in love with it and forgive yourself. So anyway, hopefully that has been useful to you. Let me know what you think.
You've been listening to Feel Good Astrology with Louisa Tanner Munson, and this recording has been made possible by all you lovely supporters at Patreon. To request a personal reading with Louisa, go to www.feelgoodastrology.com.